At my wedding reception, was adjusting my veil using the reflection of a copper backsplash behind the bar. It was an antique piece I had spent 3 months restoring by hand, stripping layers of neglect, polishing it until it could hold a face hand, stripping layers of neglect, polishing it until it could hold a face like a mirror. That mirror finish is the only reason I saw her. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood directly behind me. She wasn't watching me. She was watching my drink. I saw everything. The way her manicured fingers slipped into her clutch. The small glass vial she pinched between her thumb and forefinger. 3 clear drops falling into my champagne like they were nothing more than bubbles escaping. She didn't notice my eyes in the copper. She only saw the glass sitting unattended on the bar. I didn't turn around. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I waited. She replaced the vial, smoothed her gown, and walked away to greet a senator's wife, smiling like a woman who had just solved a problem. Only then did I move. With hands steady enough to stitch a collapsing century-old archway, I reached forward and calmly switched our glasses. Mine became hers. Hers became mine. The poison was no longer my problem. That was the exact moment the real wedding drama began. Most brides would have locked themselves in the bathroom, shaking, hyperventilating, calling the police. But I am a restoration architect. I don't deal in panic. I deal in failure points, load distribution, and controlled collapse. What I felt wasn't fear. It was static load. That silent, unbearable pressure a structure carries just before it either holds or snaps. I walked back to the head table, my heels striking the hardwood in a steady rhythm. I checked my pulse. 80 beats per minute. Elevated but controlled. I smoothed the silk of my gown and sat beside Ethan, my husband, a pediatric surgeon. A man who saved children's lives every day, yet somehow remained blind to the pathogen that raised him. He squeezed my hand beneath the table, thumb brushing my ring. He smiled at me with a love so pure it almost hurt, and whispered that I looked beautiful. 10 feet away, his mother was sipping champagne she believed would destroy me. Eleanor sat laughing with my parents, playing the benevolent matriarch flawlessly. Her foundation was perfect, her pearls immaculate, her cruelty invisible to everyone but me. She looked directly at me and raised her glass, my glass. A silent toast, a smirk that said, "Checkmate." She thought she was the architect of this moment. She thought I was just another girl who had stumbled into her dynasty. A temporary inconvenience to be handled quietly with money or chemicals. I lifted my water glass instead. My hand didn't shake. The water was cold, clean. It tasted like clarity. Eleanor took another confident drink. She had spent 2 years trying to erase me, calling my work dirty, offering me 6 figures to disappear, treating me like a squatter in her son's life. She forgot one thing about people like me. We know exactly where the weak points are, and we know exactly when to stop applying pressure. To understand why I didn't stop her, you have to understand the architecture of our war. This wasn't sudden. It was a demolition project 2 years in the making. From the moment Ethan introduced us, I was a zoning violation in Eleanor's perfectly curated world. The Sterlings were old money, which usually just means their wealth is dusty and they're terrified of anyone who works with their hands. I met Eleanor during an estate inspection. I was in work boots, hard hat smudged with drywall dust. She stared at my hands like they carried disease and asked Ethan, right in front of me, if he was hiring help. When he said I was his girlfriend, she didn't smile. She said, "Oh." The insults were never loud. They were structural. Forgotten invitations, introductions that minimized my degrees, smiles that cracked foundations. 6 months ago, she slid a cream-colored envelope across her mahogany desk. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000, a severance package. "You're a lovely girl," she said, "but let's be realistic. You build things. We own things. You'll never belong here." I slid the check back. "I think you're underestimating the cost of labor," I said. "I'm not for sale." That was when her eyes changed. That was when I became a threat. Psychologists call it an extinction burst. When control stops working, behavior escalates. Screaming, sabotage, destruction. The week before the wedding was her extinction burst. She tried to cancel our florist, claiming I had died. She tore my veil. She planted doubt everywhere. So when I saw the vial, everything aligned. This wasn't about stopping the wedding. It was about humiliating me, making me sick, destroying my reputation in front of the city's elite. She wanted chaos. I let her have it. Structural collapse is never instant. It groans first. Ethan finished his speech. Applause filled the hall, then silence. A spoon tapped crystal. Eleanor stood. She raised the poisoned glass and began her toast. Words about trust, partnership, family. She drank, one gulp, two, nothing happened. Then, at 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the structure failed. Her face drained of color, her knees buckled. She grabbed the tablecloth and pulled everything down with her. The vomit was violent, the smell immediate. The perfect woman collapsed in front of 200 witnesses. Ethan ran to her. Chaos erupted. I stood. I took control. The paramedics came. Her clutch fell open. The empty vial spilled out. So did a folded piece of stationery. I picked it up. It was a speech. A pre-written narrative framing me as unstable, as sick, as deserving. Ethan read it. Something in him died. At the hospital, the police listened. I showed them the footage. The timestamp. The proof. Eleanor confessed to Ethan. Said she did it to save him. He pressed charges. That was the moment I knew I had married the right man. 12 months later, she is serving time. We live in a fixer-upper. I repair broken ceramics with gold. You don't hide the cracks, you honor them. Because the break is where the strength lives. If you believe toxic people don't deserve a seat at your table, share this story. And tell me, what's the pettiest thing you've ever seen at a wedding? The weeks after the wedding moved with an eerie slowness, like walking through a building after an earthquake. Everything was still standing, but nothing felt safe to touch. Ethan and I returned from the hospital that night in silence. Not the angry kind, not the broken kind. It was the silence of two people recalculating the entire blueprint of their lives. The estate felt wrong the moment we stepped inside. The chandeliers glowed too brightly. The ceilings felt lower. Every room carried her fingerprints. Eleanor had curated that house the way she curated her reputation, polished, controlled, and deeply hostile to anything that didn't belong to her. Ethan loosened his tie and set it on the marble counter. His hands were steady, but his eyes were not. He stared at the wall as if it might explain how a woman who packed his lunches and stitched his Halloween costumes could also write a script for my public destruction. I should have seen it, he said finally. I didn't rush to comfort him. I had learned that night that rushing creates cracks. I spoke carefully. You were trained to heal, I said. Not to diagnose your own family. He exhaled, sharp and shaky. She was willing to hurt you. No, I corrected gently. She was willing to erase me. That distinction mattered. Over the next few days, the fallout spread through society like a stress fracture. Calls came in waves. Some were cautious. Some were sympathetic. Some were venomously quiet. Invitations disappeared. Names vanished from guest lists. Old money doesn't shout, it isolates. Ethan's father tried to negotiate. He framed it as damage control, as if this were a failed business deal instead of attempted murder. He offered lawyers. He offered money. He offered silence. Ethan offered him the door. That was the day Ethan stopped being a son and became a husband. The restraining order was approved within 48 hours. Eleanor wasn't allowed within 500 feet of either of us. The judge used words like premeditated and malicious intent. Words that don't fade. Words that permanently stain a legacy. The press never got the story Eleanor wrote. They got the footage instead. The sterling name cracked, and cracks, once visible, invite inspection. We didn't move into the estate. I refused before Ethan could even suggest it. Living there would have been like restoring a house where the mold had reached the beams. Some structures aren't worth saving. We bought a neglected place across town. Brick exterior, sagging porch, windows clouded with decades of dust. Everyone else saw a mess. I saw potential. I ripped out rot. I reinforced joists. I replaced weak supports with steel. Ethan painted walls between shifts. We ate dinner on the floor surrounded by tools and boxes, laughing in a way that felt earned. At night, sometimes, he'd wake up shaking. I'd remind him of facts. Dates, outcomes, reality. Restoration isn't about pretending damage never happened. It's about stabilizing what remains. Eleanor wrote letters from prison. Long ones, carefully worded. Apologies without accountability. Blame disguised as love. She addressed them only to Ethan. He never opened them. He handed them to me unopened and asked me to dispose of them properly. So I shredded them and mixed the paper into pulp. I poured it into molds and let it dry into imperfect sheets. Then I used those sheets to line the drawers of our home. The past didn't disappear, it was repurposed. On our first anniversary, Ethan surprised me with a small wooden box. Inside was the repaired veil. The gold-threaded tear glimmered softly. "You fixed everything she tried to destroy," he said. I shook my head. "No, I let it show." That night we hosted our first dinner party. Friends, chosen family, laughter without hierarchy, no performance. No pedigree, no poison. As I watched Ethan pour wine, careful and attentive, I realized something essential. Some families are inherited, others are built. And the strongest ones are designed by people who understand load, pressure, and when to let a failing structure fall. If you've ever had to cut someone off to save yourself, you already know this truth. Survival isn't loud, it's precise. Time does a strange thing after trauma. It doesn't move forward in a straight line. It circles. Some days felt normal, almost boring. Other days, a smell, a song, the clink of glass would pull me straight back to that reception hall. Champagne became water for me after that. Ethan noticed before I said anything. He always did. He started ordering sparkling cider without comment, without questions. Love, I learned, often looks like quiet adjustments no one else notices. The legal process dragged on. Eleanor's attorneys tried everything. They questioned my credibility. They hinted at jealousy, at exaggeration, at attention-seeking. One even suggested that I had orchestrated the entire thing to trap a wealthy family. I sat in those rooms calm and unmoving. Because lies are load-bearing only until the truth arrives. The security footage never changed. The vial never disappeared. The note never rewrote itself. Facts don't bend just because someone with influence leans on them. When sentencing came, Eleanor didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, posture perfect, as if dignity alone could save her. The judge read the charges slowly, carefully: aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, premeditation. When the sentence was announced, a collective breath left the room. 24 months, not long enough to match the damage she intended. Long enough to send a message. As she was led away, she finally looked at Ethan, not with love, not with regret, with accusation. As if he had betrayed her by surviving her. Ethan didn't move. That was the last time he saw her. Grief came later, not for her, but for the version of his childhood he realized had never truly existed. You don't mourn the person. You mourn the illusion. Some nights he talked, some nights he didn't. I never forced either. I learned that restoration isn't just physical. You don't rush curing time, you don't load weight before the structure is ready. Slowly we built rituals, morning coffee on the porch, shared silence, hands brushing in passing, proof of life continuing. People ask me now if I was scared that night, if my hands shook when I switched the glasses. The truth is, fear comes from uncertainty. And by then, I was certain. Certain that Eleanor underestimated me. Certain that she confused kindness with weakness. Certain that she believed control was the same as power. She was wrong. Power is knowing when to step back and let someone collapse under their own weight. Our house is almost finished now. The porch no longer sags. The walls hold firm. The cracks that remain are intentional, traced with gold, visible and honest. Sometimes guests ask about them. I tell them the truth. This house survived something, I say, and it's stronger for it. So are we. Because the strongest marriages aren't the ones that never face poison. They're the ones where both partners recognize it in time and choose each other anyway. There is a strange myth people believe about justice. They think it ends the moment a sentence is handed down, that once the gavel falls, life neatly resets itself. It doesn't. Justice is paperwork, waiting rooms, and learning how to breathe in places that once felt unsafe. After the trial, Eleanor's name became something people whispered instead of praised. The same women who once laughed at her jokes suddenly remembered appointments whenever her name came up. Old money circles close ranks fast, but they abandon faster. Reputation, I learned, is just another structure. Impressive until the first crack appears. Ethan went back to work 2 weeks later. Children still needed saving. Bodies still broke in ways that had nothing to do with family betrayal. At the hospital, he was steady, precise, brilliant. At home, some nights, he sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at nothing. I didn't try to fix him. You don't repair a living thing the way you repair stone. You support it. You brace it. You let it move at its own pace. One evening, months later, he finally spoke the sentence he had been circling. "She never loved me," he said quietly. "I didn't argue, I didn't soften it. I just reached across the table and took his hand." "She loved control," I said. "You were how she accessed it." The truth didn't shatter him. It settled him. Like a beam finally resting where it belonged. The last letter from Alina arrived on a rainy Tuesday. This one was shorter. No apologies, no excuses. Just one line written with unmistakable entitlement. "You owe me forgiveness." Ethan read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the fireplace. He struck the match himself. We watched the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not something you owe to people who would poison you. It's something you give yourself when you stop carrying their weight. A year passed, our house filled with sounds that didn't echo, friends dropping by unannounced, laughter that didn't check who was listening, music playing without concern for taste or tradition. On the anniversary of our wedding, Ethan brought out 2 glasses, water. He raised his glass, smiled, and said, "To clear vision." I touched mine to his. "And steady hands." That night, as we lay in bed, I realized something that surprised even me. I was grateful, not for what she did, never for that, but for what it revealed, for the test that proved who we were when everything was on the line. Some people try to destroy you quietly, with whispers, with manipulation, with poison hidden in celebration. But when you survive that, you gain something rare. Certainty. Certainty that love is not obedience. Certainty that family is not blood alone. Certainty that strength doesn't roar, it holds. If you're listening to this, and you're standing inside a structure that feels unstable, pay attention to the cracks. They're not warnings of failure. They're invitations to rebuild. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is step aside and let what's rotten fall on its own. People sometimes ask me if I regret not stopping her sooner. If I wish I had exposed Alina months earlier, before it ever reached that night. It's a reasonable question, asked by people who believe evil always announces itself loudly. It doesn't. It wears perfume. It hosts dinners. It smiles for photographs. If I had accused her without proof, I would have lost. She would have cried. She would have denied everything. Ethan would have been torn in half, and doubt would have done the work poison never could. I didn't win because I was lucky. I won because I waited. There is a difference between revenge and precision. Revenge is emotional. Precision is patient. One destroys blindly. The other allows gravity to do its job. Alina wasn't undone by me. She was undone by her own certainty. Certainty that no one would believe me. Certainty that her status made her untouchable. Certainty that her son would always choose her. That last miscalculation cost her everything. Ethan and I rarely talk about her now. Not because it hurts, but because she no longer occupies structural space in our lives. You don't keep discussing a wall you already removed. Occasionally, a new resident in the city recognizes us. They mention the story in hushed tones like it's urban legend. They ask how I stayed so calm. I tell them the truth. When you work with collapsing buildings long enough, you stop fearing the noise. You focus on where to stand so you don't get crushed. Our marriage isn't perfect. We argue about paint colors, about schedules, about whether a crack needs gold or should be left raw. But when real pressure comes, when something threatens the foundation, we don't fracture. We align. That's what she never understood. You can't poison a bond built on truth. You can't sabotage a structure designed by 2 people who see clearly. I look at the bowl on the table, its golden seams catching the light, and I think about how many people spend their lives hiding damage, pretending nothing ever broke. But breakage is inevitable. What matters is what you do next. You can pretend the crack isn't there, or you can fill it with something stronger. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. Being quiet doesn't mean being weak. Waiting doesn't mean being powerless. And sometimes, the most devastating move you can make is simply stepping aside and letting someone reveal exactly who they are. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever survived manipulation, betrayal, or quiet cruelty, share it with someone who needs to hear this. And remember, not everything that smiles at your table deserves a seat.